The night was bitterly cold. 16-year-old Oliver pulled his thin jacket tighter, shivering on a park bench that had become his only bed. In his arms, he clutched a ragged backpack, everything he owned stuffed inside. Around him, the city buzzed with life. People hurried home to warm dinners and glowing windows, while Oliver sat in the shadows, invisible. To the world, he wasn't a teenager with dreams. He was just the homeless kid. But the hardest part wasn't the cold. It was the silence. The feeling that no one cared whether he made it through the night. I remember staring at those lit windows, Oliver would later say, and wondering, why not me? Why don't I get a chance at that life? Hunger clawed at his stomach. Fear whispered in his ear. But somewhere, buried under the pain, a stubborn voice fought back. This isn't where my story ends. I don't know how, but I'll find a way out. What Oliver didn't know, sitting alone on that frozen bench, was that his escape would begin not with money, not with luck, but with an old computer in a public library. Long before Oliver found himself sleeping on that park bench, life had already tested him in ways most people could never imagine. His childhood was marked not by stability, but by constant movement. Cheap motels 1 month, crowded shelters the next. His father had walked out when Oliver was only 8. His mother, though determined, could never hold on to steady work. Bills piled up, eviction notices arrived like clockwork, and eventually, the fragile structure of home crumbled entirely. By the time he turned 14, Oliver had learned to carry his world on his shoulders, literally. A single backpack held his clothes, a few photographs, and a worn-out notebook where he scribbled his thoughts. That notebook was the only place he felt safe enough to dream. School should have been his escape. At first, it was. Teachers once called him brilliant, the kid who asked too many questions, the one who solved puzzles others gave up on. But poverty left scars that intelligence couldn't hide. Showing up in the same faded hoodie day after day made him a target. Whispers followed him down hallways. That's the homeless kid. Some teachers looked away, others gave up on him completely. I can still remember the shame, Oliver would later admit. Not because I didn't have things, but because everyone reminded me of it. Every stare, every laugh, it made me feel smaller and smaller. Hunger became a constant companion. Some mornings, he went to class with nothing but a stale piece of bread in his stomach. Concentrating was nearly impossible, and yet, somewhere inside, he still held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, education could be his way out. But reality was harsh. Without a permanent address, Oliver couldn't even fill out certain forms at school. When his mother disappeared from his life altogether, the system labeled him a runaway. He was shuffled between shelters, until even those became overcrowded. That's when the park benches and bus stops became his only refuge. It wasn't just survival of the body, it was survival of the spirit. Nights were the hardest. The city quieted down, the air grew colder, and loneliness wrapped itself around him like a second skin. He'd stare at the stars, whispering questions into the darkness. Why me? Why was I given this life? Yet, for all the despair, there was something different about Oliver. A stubborn ember that refused to die. He found small pockets of escape in unexpected places. Sometimes, he wandered into coffee shops just to feel normal, sitting in a corner pretending he belonged. Other times, he lingered outside bookstores, staring at covers of novels and self-help guides, wishing he could afford even one. I didn't want money, he would say later. I wanted knowledge. I wanted to understand how the world worked, how people built lives for themselves. I thought, if I can just learn, maybe I can change my story. But in those days, learning seemed like an impossible dream. What chance did a homeless teenager have in a world that moved so fast? Employers didn't look twice at him. People avoided eye contact. Doors kept closing before he even reached them. And yet, somewhere between the cold benches, the empty stomachs, and the endless rejection, fate was quietly guiding him toward a place he had never really noticed before. A place that didn't ask for money, didn't judge his clothes, and didn't care about where he came from. A public library. Oliver had no idea at the time, but those doors would open not just to warmth and shelter, but to the very spark that would ignite his future. One cold afternoon, with nowhere else to go, Oliver pushed open the heavy glass doors of the city's public library. At first, it wasn't knowledge he was looking for, it was warmth. The blast of heated air wrapped around him like a blanket, a rare comfort. Rows of shelves stretched endlessly, filled with books he couldn't afford, but no one here asked for money. No one asked where he lived. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't being judged. He was just another visitor, another face among quiet readers. Oliver sank into a chair, clutching his backpack like a shield, and let himself breathe. But as the days passed, the library became more than just a shelter. He wandered between shelves, pulling out books at random. Self-help guides, biographies, even science magazines. Anything that could distract him from hunger and hopelessness. And then, one day, he stumbled across a dusty old computer lab tucked in the back corner. Curious, he sat down at a terminal. On the screen glowed a world he had never explored before, the internet. Tutorials, articles, videos, an endless ocean of information, and it was all free. That's when he found it, coding. It started with small things. Free lessons on how to build a simple web page. At first, the lines of code looked like a foreign language, but something about it fascinated him. He could type strange symbols into the screen and watch them transform into colors, words, designs. It was like magic, and for the first time in years, Oliver felt in control of something. "I remember staring at that screen for hours," he would later say, thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the way I change my life. Day after day, Oliver returned to that library. He taught himself HTML, then CSS, then a little JavaScript. When his time on the public computer ran out, he begged for extensions, sometimes waiting hours just for another chance to practice. He scribbled notes furiously in his old notebook, the same one he once used to write dreams, now filled with lines of code. The hunger didn't disappear. The loneliness didn't vanish. But for the first time, Oliver had hope. A purpose. The librarians noticed him too. Quiet, determined, always typing, always learning. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, started leaving programming books on the desk where he usually sat. She never said much, just a smile, a nod, but Oliver never forgot it. In a world that had turned its back on him, her small kindness meant everything. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Oliver began building small projects, websites for imaginary businesses, simple games. He wasn't just learning to code. He was learning discipline, problem-solving, persistence. Each bug he fixed felt like a tiny victory, proof that he wasn't powerless. "Coding taught me something life never did," Oliver recalled. "That failure wasn't the end. If you keep trying, eventually, the code runs." Maybe life was the same. Soon, he began to dream bigger. What if these skills could earn him money? What if he could create something real, something that mattered? But dreams were one thing. The world outside the library was still cruel. Finding a way to turn his newfound knowledge into survival would be his next and greatest challenge. Oliver didn't know it yet, but his long nights of hunger and determination were laying the foundation for something extraordinary. A future no one could have predicted for the boy who once had nothing. By now, the library had become Oliver's second home. Every spare hour was spent at a computer, lines of code filling his screen while hunger gnawed at his stomach. He didn't just study. He practiced relentlessly, building small projects and tearing them apart to see how they worked. But knowledge alone couldn't change his life. He needed to prove that his skills had value. One night, scrolling through a community board online, Oliver discovered something that lit a fire in him: freelance coding jobs. Simple tasks, fixing bugs, building small websites. They didn't pay much, but to him, even a few dollars meant food, survival, hope. The first applications were brutal. Rejections piled up, some didn't even bother to reply. Who would trust a homeless teenager with no degree, no experience, and no resume? Every no felt like a punch in the gut, Oliver later admitted. But I reminded myself, I've survived worse. If I can survive the streets, I can survive rejection. Finally, after weeks of trying, someone gave him a chance. It was a tiny job, designing a simple landing page. But when Oliver received his first $20 online, it felt like a fortune. Not because of the money, but because someone had valued his work. That one job turned into another, then another. His notebook filled with project ideas, his confidence growing with every success. And slowly, the thought began to form. What if I built something of my own? Oliver remembered the struggles of being homeless, how hard it was to find food, shelters, and resources. What if there was an app that connected people in need to the help available around them? Something simple, but life-changing. It wasn't just about survival anymore. For the first time, Oliver wasn't just fixing problems. He was imagining solutions. That idea, scribbled in his battered notebook, would one day become the seed of a startup. A startup that would take him from forgotten teenager to recognized innovator. Oliver didn't know it yet, but the spark of his future had just been born. Oliver poured every ounce of energy into his idea. Between freelance jobs and sleepless nights at the library, he coded the first version of his app, a simple platform that mapped out nearby food banks, shelters, and free resources for people in need. It wasn't polished, but it worked. At first, no one noticed. He shared it on small forums, posted links in community groups, and handed out scraps of paper at shelters. Slowly, though, word began to spread. People were using it. Families were finding meals. Strangers were sleeping in safer places because of something Oliver had built. For the first time, Oliver recalled, "I felt like my pain wasn't wasted. I could use it to help others." That's when opportunities started knocking. A local nonprofit reached out, offering to collaborate. Journalists picked up the story of the homeless teen who built an app to fight homelessness. Suddenly, Oliver's name wasn't whispered with pity, it was spoken with admiration. Investors began calling. At first, Oliver couldn't believe it. Men in suits, people who once would have walked past him on the street, now wanted to sit at his table. They saw potential in his vision. They saw a business. And then came the life-changing moment. A major tech company offered to acquire his startup. The deal was worth more than Oliver had ever imagined. Signing that contract, he wasn't just earning money. He was rewriting his destiny. The boy who once begged for warmth on a park bench was now shaking hands with CEOs, his name attached to a company making real impact. But Oliver's greatest victory wasn't the money. It was the realization that he had transformed his suffering into something powerful, proof that even from the lowest point, greatness could rise. Years after that freezing night on the park bench, Oliver stood in front of a crowd of young people, holding the microphone with steady hands. Behind him, the screen displayed his story, once homeless, now the founder of a company that had been acquired by a tech giant. But what mattered most to him wasn't the money, the headlines, or the deals. It was the fact that his app was still helping people, the very kind of people he once sat beside in shelters and on cold sidewalks. With his new resources, Oliver didn't disappear into comfort. He poured his energy back into the community, launching programs to teach coding to homeless and underprivileged youth. For many of them, he wasn't just a mentor. He was living proof that change was possible. "I know what it feels like to be invisible," he told them. "But you are not invisible. You are not forgotten. If I could learn, if I could rise, so can you." Looking back, Oliver realized his journey had never been about escaping hardship. It was about transforming it. Every rejection, every night of hunger, every cold bench had shaped the fire that drove him. And now, that fire lit the path for others. From homeless teenager to CEO, Oliver's story wasn't just one of survival. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the belief that even the smallest spark, like a free library computer, can ignite a future beyond imagination. And his message to the world was simple. Your circumstances do not define your destiny. What matters is the fight inside you. If Oliver's journey inspired you, imagine how many more untold stories are out there. Stories of pain, persistence, and transformation. At Before After Stories, we believe every before can become an extraordinary after. Subscribe to our channel, share this video, and be part of a community that celebrates resilience, hope, and change. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to spark someone's future.